Emergency response team, what's the situation?
We need an ambulance now. A trainer's been pulled under.
Keltie Byrne was just 20 or so. 20 years old. Young, full of life, and brimming with dreams of changing the marine world. A gifted swimmer, a passionate marine biology student, and a beloved team member at Sealand of the Pacific. She embodied hope and dedication, but on a cold, ordinary afternoon in February 1991, her life was stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. She didn't fall. She wasn't careless. She was betrayed. Dragged into a nightmare no one could stop. Her cries for help and the desperate rescue attempts were drowned beneath the chilling reality of what was happening in that tank. This isn't just a story of a tragic accident. It's the horrifying truth about the last moments of Keltie Byrne, a young woman who never stood a chance. Keltie wasn't just another trainer. She was extraordinary, a champion swimmer who moved through water as if she belonged there. A top student at the University of Victoria, studying marine biology with dreams of making the oceans safer for animals. But most importantly, she was a young woman with a heart full of love for the sea, its creatures, and the people around her. She wasn't driven by fame or money. For Keltie, it was simple. She believed she could make a difference. So, when she took a part-time job at Sealand of the Pacific in British Columbia, it felt like a dream come true, working up close with orcas, the gentle giants she had admired since childhood. What could be better? She wasn't just their trainer, she was their caregiver, their friend. Every morning she brushed their teeth, prepared their meals with care, and spent hours building trust, often talking to them softly, as if they could truly understand. And perhaps, in some way they did. But behind the smiles and the excitement was a reality no one dared to confront. The three orcas she bonded with were not the gentle giants the public believed. They were captives, stolen from the wild, confined to a small concrete pool, stripped of the vast oceans they once ruled. Day after day, their frustration grew. Their psychological scars deepened. They were ticking time bombs. Keltie's kindness couldn't undo their captivity. Her gentle voice couldn't erase their trauma. She loved them, but the world they were trapped in had already twisted something inside them. She was in the water with creatures who, beneath their trained routines and playful performances, harbored more pain and rage than anyone could imagine. And on that fateful afternoon, it all exploded. Sealand of the Pacific was no sea-alled. It was a small, modest marine park floating on the cold waters of Victoria, British Columbia. Its main attraction, 3 captive killer whales. Tilikum, a 6-ton, 22-foot male captured from Iceland at just 2 years old, ripped from his family pod. Haidu, a dominant female taken from the wild and forced into artificial hierarchy. And Nootka, a female with a deeply troubled past, scarred by confinement and failed pregnancies. Together, they were crammed into a floating pen barely large enough for them to swim in circles. By day, they performed for crowds. By night, they were locked inside a pitch, black metal module called the Module Pen, a space so cramped, so suffocating, they had no room to escape each other. It was here that their psychological torment festered. The 2 females, Haida and Nootka, took out their frustration on Tilikum, raking their teeth across his body, leaving deep, bleeding scars. These weren't random attacks. They were daily lessons in dominance. Captivity induced aggression. But the most chilling part, the aggression wasn't just between the whales. It was building, mutating, shifting. Wild, free-roaming apex predators, forced into confinement, see their instincts twist. Their patience wears thin. The trainers, those who love them, became part of a system that ignored the warning signs. Sand setup was a fragile powder keg. Every interaction, a gamble. Management believed the orcas were controllable, that routines and shows could suppress the rage beneath the surface. But they were wrong. On February 2020, 1991, the nightmare unfolded. A routine afternoon performance had just ended. The crowd, oblivious, filtered out as Keltie prepared to feed the whales. Then a miss, a slick patch beneath her foot. She slipped, plunging into the frigid tank. At first, no one panicked. She was a strong swimmer, familiar with these whales. But this time was different. As she surfaced, reaching for the edge, Tilikum grabbed her foot and dragged her under. What followed wasn't a coordinated attack. It was chaos. A deadly game between frustrated apex predators and a young woman fighting for her life. They pushed her, dragged her, tossed her between them like a rag doll. Each time she gasped for air, they pulled her back down. Witnesses described her desperate screams, the horror in her eyes, the helplessness of a staff who could only watch as the orcas turned on their beloved. This is the untold truth behind aquarium walls, the reality of captivity, the cost of human arrogance, and the tragic fate of a young woman who only wanted to make a difference. If you believe Kelt's voice deserves to be heard, share her story. Spread awareness, because these stories must be told, and we will not stay silent. Keltie Byrne's colleague had become a plaything for the orcas, a horrifying reality for which Sealand was utterly unprepared. There were no emergency protocols, no tranquilizers, no physical barriers to separate her from the whales. The park's fragile setup left everyone powerless as agonizing minutes passed, each one stretching into an eternity of helplessness. Keltie fought with everything she had, but against 6-ton predators, human strength meant nothing. What had begun as a simple slip escalated into a fatal struggle no one could stop. As the minutes dragged on, a chilling realization set in. Keltie wasn't getting out alive. The staff scrambled into emergency mode, throwing life rings, rescue buoys, nets, and poles into the water in a desperate attempt to distract the whales and create an opening for Keltie to escape. But it was useless. The orcas ignored the chaos above, their focus locked solely on her. Keltie resurfaced one last time, gasping, coughing, her arms flailing toward the edge. Then came the most haunting moment of all. Her trembling, terror-filled voice crying out, "I don't want to die." Those words, raw and final, echoed across the water before she was dragged under again. Witnesses stood paralyzed as the whales, creatures the trainers had loved and trusted, passed Keltie's. Body between them, like a cruel game of underwater tag. Tilikum, massive and slow, would grip her, only for one of the females to surge in and snatch her away, dragging her into the depths over and over. It wasn't a quick attack. It was a prolonged, nightmarish struggle. For over 10 minutes, Keltie endured sheer terror, drowning, suffocating, battered, and dragged with no chance of escape. Every lifeline thrown her way sank into futility. Then, finally, the pool went still. The orcas, exhausted from their brutal game, released her lifeless body. By the time emergency personnel arrived, it was too late. Keltie, once a vibrant, passionate young woman with a future ahead of her, was gone. Her body, battered and broken, a victim of captivity's hidden horrors. The trainers who had worked alongside her were shattered. Some stood frozen in shock, replaying those horrific minutes in their minds. Others wept uncontrollably, unable to reconcile the creatures they had trained with the predators they had just witnessed. The brutal truth was undeniable. These orcas had never been tamed, only contained. And when that containment failed, no human stood a chance. Sands management scrambled to control the narrative, framing Kel's death as a tragic accident, blaming her slip rather than the years of confinement that had twisted the whale's instincts. But the truth couldn't be buried. The public demanded answers. Media outlets exposed the park's inadequate facilities and ignored warnings. And within months, Sealand of the Pacific shut its doors for good. The 3 orcas were shipped off, Haidua and Nootka to other marine parks, and Tilikum, now marked by his first human kill, to SeaWorld Orlando. But the trauma of that day lingered for the trainers. Keltie's final screams would haunt them for years. For the orcas, especially Tilikum, the scars of captivity only deepened. What happened at Sealand wasn't an isolated tragedy, it was the first chapter in a much darker story. At SeaWorld, Tilikum was marketed as a gentle giant, performing for packed crowds, his past buried beneath choreographed spectacles. But the rage never left him. In 1999, he killed again a trespasser named Daniel Dukes, whose mutilated body was found draped over Tilikum's back. SeaWorld dismissed it as an accident. Then in 2010, the world watched in horror as Tilikum seized SeaWorld trainer Don Branco during a live show, dragging her underwater and thrashing her violently for 45 minutes before she died. 45 minutes before Theus Keltie Byrne's death had been the first warning. Ignored, Daniel Dukes's was the second buried. Don Branco's was the final, undeniable proof that captivity had broken Tilikum beyond repair. His story wasn't just about a killer whale. It was a damning indictment of an industry that prioritized profit over the well-being of intelligent, wild beings. Keltie's death sent shockwaves through her family, her friends, and the marine biology community. She had been a light, bright, passionate, full of promise, snuffed out by a system that refused to see the danger until it was too late. Her voice deserved to be heard, not as a cautionary tale, but as a demand for change. All of that was stolen in a moment. No criminal charges were ever filed. No one was held accountable. There were no courtroom battles, no public reckoning, just a quiet, almost clinical shutting of Sean's gates, as if closing the doors could erase the horror. For Keltie's family, the silence that followed was deafening. The corporate world moved on, but those who loved her never could. Yet her name refused to fade. Every time Tilikum's story was told, Keltie's resurfaced. The first warning unheeded. The first life lost in a series of tragedies that would eventually expose the dark underbelly of marine entertainment worldwide. But beyond the headlines, beyond the controversies, Keltie Byrne was so much more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman who loved deeply, loved often, and believed in a future where humans and animals could coexist with respect and compassion. Her life was cut short, but her story echoes as a solemn reminder. When we silence nature, when we catch its wild heart for profit and spectacle, there is always a price. And sometimes that price is alive. Her name will not be forgotten, not by those who loved her, not by those who bear witness to her. Her story today, Keltie Byrne's horrifying final moments, forced the world to confront a truth it had long ignored. Killer whales, no matter how well trained, no matter how familiar, are not performers. They are wild, sentient beings, predators born to rule the vast oceans, not to entertain us inside concrete walls. Her death was not just a tragic accident. It was the crack that split open decades of silence, exposing the uncomfortable questions about captivity, exploitation, and the dangerous illusion of human control over nature. Sealand of the Pacific may have shut its doors, but the ripples of that day still echo across every marine park, every stage show, every tank where wild creatures are forced to perform for applause. Every ripple in that pool whispers a haunting reminder. This should never have happened. If Keltie's story moved you, if you believe her voice still deserves to be heard, share it. Let others know what really happened behind those aquarium walls, because these stories demand to be told, and we will not stay silent. Now I want to hear from you. Which story should I tell next? Drop it in the comments below. Your suggestion could be the next voice we bring to